People have a funny way of assigning value to you based on job titles, brand names, and LinkedIn headlines. At my family reunion, I learned just how loud their assumptions could be until someone far more powerful than any of them walked in and changed everything. Hi, I'm Rachel Lynn. I'm 34, and on paper, I'm a project coordinator for a sustainability initiative. What most people don't know is that I built that initiative from the ground up, and I quietly own 60% of the holding company that funds it. But that day, no one knew that. They just saw my title, and they laughed. The reunion was hosted at my Uncle Robert's mansion in Marin County. Picture crystal wine glasses, caviar trays, and conversations that revolved around bonuses and brand names. Everyone seemed to be peacocking their latest luxury or career leap. I had barely stepped onto the patio when it began. Rachel, still doing that little coordinator thing, my cousin Vanessa trilled, her voice sharp with faux curiosity. She worked in public relations and made sure everyone knew which celebrities had passed through her hands. I smiled politely. Yeah, I'm still with Eco Horizon. I sipped my drink, anticipating her smirk. She didn't disappoint. Vanessa exchanged a look with her brother, Derek, who laughed and said, "You really should apply to one of the firms we partner with. They could use someone to coordinate coffee orders." I laughed along, not because it was funny, but because I'd heard worse. What they didn't know was that Eco Horizon wasn't just some nonprofit job I stumbled into. I founded it, strategically hidden behind layers of structure. But I let the moment pass. I had a bigger plan that didn't involve defending myself. The afternoon unfolded, the digs kept coming. "So, no wedding ring yet? You still renting that tiny loft downtown? You know, success is about growth, Rachel, not just doing what you love." These were my relatives. People who had watched me grow up, who'd once shared backyard BBQs and water balloon fights with me. But somewhere along the way, their kindness got buried under career comparisons and inheritance gossip. I could feel the judgment pressing on me, but I stayed calm. After all, reunions weren't battles. Not yet, at least. It was around 3 p.m. when the energy shifted. The event was buzzing with chatter, but then someone whispered, "Wait, is that Charles Fontaine?" All heads turned. Charles Fontaine, CEO of one of the largest renewable energy conglomerates in the world. His face had graced Forbes, Fast Company, and The Economist. And he was walking straight toward me. People started shifting, murmuring among themselves. "What's he doing here? Wait, did someone invite him? Does he know Robert?" No one had a clue. I stayed still, sipping my water, watching the slow unraveling of their smugness. Charles reached me, extended his hand, then, to the shock of everyone around, gave a short, respectful bow. "Rachel," he said warmly, "thank you for taking the time. I know how protective you are of your schedule." A fork clattered onto a plate. Someone gasped. I heard Vanessa whisper, "What the?" I smiled at Charles. "Of course. You know I wouldn't miss our quarterly sync. This place just happened to line up perfectly." He laughed. "Well, you always pick the best venues. I just hope your cousins realize they're in the presence of the real visionary behind our next 3 joint ventures." I could practically feel my relatives' jaws hit the patio floor. And it only got better from there. Charles turned to the group, addressing them like an audience. "This woman," he gestured to me, "is not only the architect of the Coastal Reclaim Initiative, but she also negotiated 3 of our largest global sustainability partnerships. If you've read any of our last few investor letters, you know how pivotal her leadership is." Silence. Complete, glorious silence. I looked around slowly. Vanessa's face was frozen in a nervous smile. Derek looked like someone had just unplugged his brain. Even Uncle Robert stood there blinking, holding a now warm flute of champagne. I could have rubbed it in. I could have taken the mic and delivered a TED talk on humility, but I didn't. Instead, I just nodded and said, "We all do what we can." But the best part hadn't even happened yet. After some murmured apologies and stunned stammering, Charles leaned toward me and said, "I brought the papers. If you're ready, we can sign the expansion deal now. Your team can begin onboarding Monday." I took the folder, thumbed through the crisp documents, and signed. There, on the back patio of a family reunion where I was once considered small, I signed a multi-million-dollar contract that would expand Eco Horizon's global reach by 38%. Then I handed the folder back to Charles and said something I'd been waiting years to say, "Thanks for coming. I know you're busy. Tell the board I'll video in on Tuesday instead. I want to enjoy the rest of this small little get-together." He chuckled and gave another nod before heading out, leaving a trail of stunned silence in his wake. I turned around to see my entire extended family staring at me like they were trying to piece together a magic trick. It was as if they'd never seen me before, and maybe they hadn't. The thing is, I never needed their approval. But for years, I had quietly wished for their respect. It used to sting, being seen as the underachiever, the one who chose passion over profit. They didn't know the layers behind what I did, how intentional my career decisions were. What they saw was a woman without a flashy title. What they missed was the woman who'd spent 10 years building a network of influence behind closed doors, cultivating partnerships, structuring funding, and creating a global shift in clean tech. One by one, they began approaching me. Some stumbled through compliments. Others asked how I got so lucky. Vanessa, red-faced, actually asked if I could recommend her to our communications team. I didn't gloat. I just smiled and said, "We're always looking for passionate people, but we vet for humility." She nodded, not knowing what to say. Later that evening, as the crowd thinned and conversations mellowed, Uncle Robert approached me. "I always knew you were smart," he said, swirling the last of his wine. "But I didn't know you were running an empire." I shrugged. Empires are overrated. I prefer systems that scale. He chuckled and clapped me on the back. "Well, Rachel, I underestimated you." We all did. I let the words sink in. Not because I needed them, but because it reminded me of every young woman out there, dismissed because her title didn't fit someone's outdated idea of power. I walked out of that reunion not with revenge or pride, but with peace. Because the moment I stopped waiting for validation was the moment I built something too big to ignore. But I have to admit, it felt pretty damn good when the CEO bowed. After the last of the guests left and the caterers packed up, I stayed back a bit to help with the cleanup. Old habits die hard. While folding napkins and stacking plates, I overheard Vanessa talking to Derek in hushed tones near the garden archway. "She owns the company." Like, owns it? Why didn't anyone know that? Vanessa sounded more offended than surprised. She must have hidden it. Why else would she use a basic title like coordinator? Derek replied, still chewing on disbelief. I smiled to myself. They still didn't get it. Titles were masks. The real power was in what you could build and who followed you when. There was no spotlight. The truth is, I didn't hide my role because I lacked pride. I hid it because I wanted my work to speak louder than my name. I learned early on that people either respected you or tried to compete with you, and I had no interest in either of those games. At family events. But that day, something shifted. Not just in how they saw me, but in how I saw them. When I was younger, I used to crave their attention. I thought if I worked hard enough, they'd finally invite me into their tight little circle. I'd sit quietly at dinners while they talked about hedge funds and business schools, pretending not to notice how they glossed over me when sharing wins. But over the years, I stopped reaching for that seat at their table. I built my own table, and then made sure it had enough chairs for people with voices they never heard. Funny how when you're finally seen, it's never on your terms. It's on theirs. Once someone they admire validates you. After that reunion, things changed fast. I started getting LinkedIn messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Would love to connect. Heard what you're doing, super impressive. Some of them even tried to schedule coffee just to catch up. I didn't respond to most. Not out of spite, but because I had real priorities now, teams across 3 continents depending on me, and a new initiative in South Asia about to launch. But one message did catch my attention. It was from Aunt Grace, the quietest one in the family. She'd never judged me, never praised me either, but always watched closely. Her message was short: your grandmother would be proud. She always said you had a quiet fire. I sat with that line for a long time, because she was right. My grandmother raised me to believe that dignity didn't need to shout. She used to say, build a life you don't need to explain. I thought of her often during the years when people questioned my choices. And now, I finally felt like I'd honored her legacy. A few weeks later, I hosted a small gathering at my place, just a few friends and team leads from Eco Horizon. It was cozy, messy, filled with laughter and ideas. No one asked what anyone earned. We shared vision boards, not resumes. In the middle of the night, I stood at the edge of the kitchen, watching them talk, argue, sketch plans on the back of a napkin. That's when it hit me, this was the real reunion. Not the one with caviar and polished ego, but the one where purpose and possibility danced across a room like old friends. And then, just as I turned to refill a glass of wine, my phone buzzed. A message from Charles, UN Secretary, saw our coastal reclaim blueprint. They want to meet. You ready to scale this even bigger? I took a deep breath, grinning. Bigger had never been my goal, but impact had. And impact doesn't ask for applause. Before I could reply, one of my interns ran up with a question about the coral restoration simulations we'd been running. I gave her my full attention, not because it was urgent, but because she reminded me of myself a decade ago. Quiet. Overlooked. Building strength in silence, and I knew something she didn't yet know, that one day, maybe 10 years from now, she'd walk into a room filled with people who once doubted her, and someone powerful would stand up and say, she's the one who made it happen. Because it always comes full circle. That's why I'm sharing this story, not because I need to prove anything, but because if you've ever been underestimated, mocked, or brushed off, remember this: titles are temporary. So is other people's approval. Build something so strong that it doesn't need validation. Build quietly, patiently, relentlessly. Let them laugh now. Let them mock your small job, then one day, walk in, watch the CEO bow, and smile knowing you never needed them to clap. They just needed time to see who you really are. After that message from Charles, I stared at my phone for a long time. The UN. When I first started Eco Horizon out of my cramped apartment with nothing but a binder of notes, an open source data model, and a half-dead laptop, I never imagined we'd get global recognition. Back then, I couldn't even afford to hire a team. I just posted in online forums and offered people equity in a future I wasn't sure would exist, but the mission kept me going: create sustainable change by empowering communities to lead their own restoration. I knew if I could shift the conversation from aid to equity, the world would follow. Now, that world was knocking at my door. I sat down at my dining table, which still had a water ring from the early days when I worked late into the night alone, scribbling climate models and fundraising emails. I remember one winter where I had to choose between paying rent or buying a domain name for the project website. I chose the domain. That decision? It led to our first investment. It wasn't glamorous. The investor was a retired marine biologist from Florida who liked our coral reef rebuild plan. He gave us $10,000 and said, "Don't make this about you. Make it about the planet." I never forgot that. But now, years later, I realized I had made it personal, because the planet wasn't just about nature. It was about people. And people like me, people who were dismissed or overlooked, needed to know they belonged in the rooms where decisions were made. That's why that reunion meant more than just a moment of vindication. It showed me that no matter how high you climb, there will always be someone who thinks your title defines your worth, and I wasn't done proving otherwise. A few days later, I met Charles in person again, this time in Geneva. The UN session was informal, just a working roundtable. But the room was packed with delegates, ministers, and scientists who looked like they'd stepped out of a Davos catalog. Charles introduced me casually. "This is Rachel Lynn. She'll explain the application model for coastal economic renewal. She's the founder and lead architect of the Eco Horizon model." No coordinator title this time. No minimizing. They nodded respectfully, listening closely. No one cut me off. No one asked me if I was just the project manager. They took notes. They asked questions. They even asked if I could advise on the African Union's climate integration plan. I kept my voice steady, but inside, I felt something I hadn't in years: being heard. Not tolerated. Not patronized. Truly heard. And I thought of my cousins again. Not out of bitterness, but as a reminder: people judge quickly when they only see the surface. But deep work can't be dismissed forever. On the flight home, I reflected on what had truly changed. It wasn't just that others now saw me differently. I saw me differently. For so long, I'd let their voices echo in my head, causing me to doubt myself during the lowest points of the journey. I'd spent too much time wondering if I'd made the right call by staying small, staying quiet. But now, I realized something profound. I hadn't been small. I'd been focused, and being quiet, that was just strategy. When I got back, I received an unexpected call from Derek. Of all people. "Hey, Rachel," he started, sounding awkward. "I've been thinking about your work. It's actually pretty incredible. I know I've been kind of a jerk in the past, but I was wondering if you'd be open to grabbing coffee sometime? I'd love to learn more. Maybe there's a way I can contribute." The old me might have rolled my eyes or shut him down. But the new me, the whole me, recognized something even more powerful than revenge: legacy. So I agreed to meet. We sat in a cafe downtown, the same neighborhood he once called Scrappy. He asked real questions, took notes, even admitted, "I used to think success was about appearances. But watching you, seeing what you built, it shook me." That was the moment I realized that maybe, just maybe, my quiet work hadn't just changed the planet. It had changed my family. 2.1 by 1, they began reaching out. Cousins asked for internships. Nieces emailed about their college essays. Even my mother, who had once begged me to take a safe job, sent me a letter. She wrote, "I'm sorry I didn't understand your vision sooner. I thought I was protecting you from disappointment, but you didn't need protection. You needed someone to believe in the impossible right alongside you." I cried reading that. Not because I needed her apology, but because I knew how hard it was for her to admit that. And now, the little girl who once stayed quiet at family dinners, she was building something louder than any boastful conversation ever could. The Eco Horizon now spans 18 countries. We employ over 600 people full-time and contract hundreds more. We've restored over 250 miles of coastal ecosystems, and we just got shortlisted for the Earth Guardian Prize. But here's the truth, I want you to walk away with none of that mattered at the beginning. What mattered was the fire. The one no one else could see but you. The one that keeps burning even when the world thinks you're working a small job. Let them laugh, let them mock you at the reunion, let them whisper behind glasses of Chardonnay, because one day, the world won't need you to explain who you are or EIT will already know. And when the most powerful person in the room walks over, extends their hand, and bows, you'll smile, not because they finally saw you, but because you always did.